Overthinking is an illusion, the Buddhist way to clear the mental clutter. You've noticed it, haven't you? That your mind doesn't wait for your permission. It throws memories at you when you're trying to move on, fear when you're trying to stay calm, and noise when all you want is silence. Most people think they're overthinking, but that's not accurate. You're not overthinking. You're being dragged by habits you never chose, by patterns you didn't design, by a mind that has been running wild for years without supervision. Buddhism doesn't tell you to think positive or stay calm. It doesn't care about comfort. It cares about truth. And the truth is this: your mind behaves like an untrained animal, restless, hungry, impulsive, and you've been letting it lead you. You're here because you're finally ready to turn toward the storm instead of running from it. Ready to see the mind without filters, excuses, or illusions. Ready to stop negotiating with toxic thoughts and start understanding how they work. This is not about escaping the mind. This is about mastering it from the inside out. If you want clarity, you'll have to earn it. If you want focus, you'll have to dismantle everything that keeps it out of reach. This is where that process begins. 1. Recognize the mind's tricks. The first toxic habit Buddhism exposes is the human tendency to treat every thought as if it were a fact. The mind produces judgments, fears, predictions, insecurities, comparisons, and imaginary scenarios at a speed you can't even track. And the problem isn't the thoughts themselves. It's the instant, unexamined belief you give them. A single negative thought appears, and before you even realize it, your mind has spun an entire narrative around it. This will fail, not enough. Everyone can see my flaws. This situation is doomed. You don't question the thought. You fuse with it, and within seconds, something that was supposed to be nothing, a flicker of mental activity, becomes your whole emotional reality. Buddhism doesn't sugarcoat this. It calls the mind a master illusionist, constantly creating stories that feel real, even when they have no substance. The Buddhist approach is brutally simple. A thought is just a thought, nothing more. It's a temporary ripple in consciousness with no power unless you grab it, feed it, and turn it into a personal identity. The mind throws images, words, memories, and fears at you the same way clouds pass through the sky endlessly, effortlessly. But the sky is never harmed by the clouds, and your awareness is never harmed by the thoughts unless you cling to them. Once you start treating thoughts as mental events rather than truths, their influence breaks apart. Instead of reacting with fear or panic, you begin to say, "This is just a thought appearing in the mind. It doesn't define me. It doesn't predict anything. It doesn't demand action." This is what Buddhists mean by recognizing mental noise. You stop letting every thought pull you into a storyline. You stop assuming your mind is always telling the truth. And when you stop giving thoughts authority, they collapse under their own emptiness. When a toxic thought arises, the instinct is to fight it, argue with it, or try to replace it with something positive. But that only strengthens it because you're still treating it as something meaningful. The Buddhist method is far cleaner. Observe it without attachment. The same way you'd watch a leaf float down a river. You don't chase it. You don't grab it. You don't jump into the water with it. You simply notice it come and go. The more you train yourself to do this, the more you experience a quiet truth. Your thoughts are not threats. They're not commands. They're not warnings. They're not identity. They're temporary appearances. Empty, passing, dissolving the moment you stop feeding them. And once you see this clearly, toxic thoughts lose the power they used to hold over you because you're no longer caught in the mind's tricks. You're finally seeing reality instead of the stories your mind keeps inventing. 2. Understand the law of impermanence. One of the most important insights Buddhism gives you, and one of the hardest for people to actually apply, is the truth of impermanence. Everything changes. Everything fades. Everything moves. Nothing you experience, think, or feel stays fixed. Yet the root of so many toxic thoughts is the hidden belief that whatever you're feeling right now is somehow permanent. You get caught in anxiety and immediately assume this is how I am, or this is how my life will be, or this feeling will stay forever. That belief is what creates suffering, not the thought itself. Buddhism trains you to see the mind like a flowing river. Thoughts arise like waves, stay for a moment, and naturally fall away. You don't have to force them out. You don't have to replace them with positivity. You don't have to fight them. If you stop grabbing the wave, it collapses on its own. This is the beauty and brutality of impermanence. Everything passes, especially the thoughts that scare you the most. Most people never give their toxic thoughts the space to dissolve. They panic the moment a negative thought appears. They start analyzing it, worrying about it, arguing with it. All this activity convinces the mind that the thought is important, which keeps it alive far longer than it needs to be. A thought that could have vanished in 10 seconds ends up haunting you for days because you clung to it with fear and urgency. Impermanence is a psychological tool, not just a philosophical idea. When a painful or toxic thought arises, the trained mind remembers, this is temporary. This is not permanent. This will change. That simple recognition cuts the intensity of the thought in half. Suddenly, you're not drowning in it. You're watching it. You're giving the mind permission to release the grip it usually applies. The Buddha used the analogy of clouds passing through the sky. Some clouds are light and soft, others are dark and heavy, but none of them stay. None of them stain the sky. In the same way, your awareness, the true sky of your mind, isn't damaged by anxiety, fear, self-doubt, or regret. These states pass through, but they don't define the space they appear in. People get stuck in toxic thinking because they misinterpret impermanence as weakness. They think letting go means they don't care. They think watching thoughts come and go means they're not trying hard enough to fix their mind. But Buddhism flips that idea on its head. Clinging is the real weakness. Letting go is the real strength. Holding on to negativity doesn't make you more responsible. It makes you more trapped. The moment you accept that every emotion and thought is in constant motion, you stop taking the mind so seriously. Impermanence also teaches you not to trust mental states when they're at their extremes. When you feel overwhelmed or exhausted or hopeless, your mind tells you the moment is permanent. It convinces you this version of you is the real you. And because you're suffering, you believe it. But the Buddhist lens reminds you that your mind at its worst is just a phase, a passing storm. No storm lasts, no mood is final, no thought stays. Even the ones that seem heavy eventually break apart if you stop feeding them with resistance. Understanding impermanence isn't meant to make you passive. It makes you wise. It teaches you to stop fighting the waves and instead watch them rise and fall. It teaches you that clarity comes not from controlling the mind, but from allowing its movements without attachment. Once you grasp that every toxic thought is temporary by nature, its power over you collapses. You stop fearing your mind. You stop assuming your thoughts predict your future. And you begin to experience the calm that comes from seeing everything, absolutely everything, as a passing moment, not a permanent truth. 3. Break the habit of constant stimulation. Modern life has turned distraction into a lifestyle and overstimulation into a default state of mind. The mind is constantly bombarded. Notifications, scrolling, noise, conversations, opinions, videos, mental chatter. You jump from one thing to the next without ever letting the mind settle. And then you wonder why your thoughts feel chaotic, toxic, and uncontrollable. From a Buddhist perspective, this is not a mystery. It's cause and effect. A restless mind produces restless thoughts, a noisy environment produces noisy emotions, and a constantly stimulated brain loses the ability to focus, reflect, or see clearly. Buddhism calls this restlessness udatha, one of the 5 hindrances that block clarity and awareness. It's not a moral failing. It's a mental state created by habit. The problem is simple. You have trained your mind to look outward every few seconds. You have conditioned it to chase novelty, seek pleasure, escape boredom, and avoid silence. That conditioning becomes automatic. You don't even choose to distract yourself anymore. The mind does it for you, and this is exactly why toxic thoughts gain power. When the mind is restless, it becomes weak, fragmented, and vulnerable. It reacts instead of observing. It amplifies negativity because it has no stability. Think of your mind like a glass of muddy water. If you keep shaking it through stimulation, noise, scrolling, constant activity, the water stays cloudy. Nothing is clear. No insight can emerge, but if you put the glass down and let it sit, the mud settles and the water becomes calm and transparent. Buddhist meditation is built on this principle. Clarity doesn't come from forcing the mind to be quiet. It comes from removing the unnecessary agitation that keeps it disturbed in the first place. The truth is uncomfortable, but straightforward. You cannot clear toxic thoughts if your mind is overstimulated. You cannot train focus if your attention is constantly running after external input. Every time you reach for your phone out of boredom, every time you fill silence with noise, every time you avoid being alone with your mind, you are strengthening restlessness, and restlessness is the perfect breeding ground for anxiety, fear, self-doubt, and compulsive thinking. A mind that is always reacting never has time to reflect, and a mind that never reflects becomes controlled by whatever thought shows up next. Buddhism teaches that most people fear silence, not because silence is uncomfortable, but because silence reveals the truth of their inner state. When the world gets quiet, your mind becomes loud. All the suppressed emotions, unresolved fears, and ignored anxieties rise to the surface. Most people run from this. They drown it out with entertainment or distractions, thinking this protects them from discomfort. But in reality, it traps them in a cycle where toxic thoughts stay buried, unexamined, and therefore powerful. Avoiding your mind is the same as surrendering to it. That's why silence is not optional in Buddhist training. It's essential. Silence isn't about being calm or relaxing. It's about creating the conditions where the mind can finally breathe. When you sit in silence, you begin to see the constant mental movement you didn't notice before. You notice how quickly thoughts arise. You notice how easily your attention gets pulled. You notice how restless you actually are, and that awareness is the first step toward mastery. But the ego hates silence because silence forces you to meet yourself without filters, masks, or distractions. The mind will try every trick to pull you back into stimulation, suddenly remembering something urgent, feeling the urge to check your phone, craving noise or entertainment. Buddhism calls this the monkey mind, and if you always follow its impulses, you never build the strength needed to control your thoughts. Breaking the habit of constant stimulation doesn't mean retreating into the mountains or living like a monk. It means creating deliberate moments where the mind is not fed artificial noise. Even a few minutes of intentional quiet every day begins rewiring the mind. You gradually teach your attention to stop scattering. The nervous system resets, restlessness weakens, and when your mind becomes less chaotic, toxic thoughts lose their grip because they no longer have an unstable environment to thrive in. You start recognizing the difference between a mind that is agitated and a mind that is clear. When you're overstimulated, even neutral thoughts can turn negative. A simple mistake becomes a catastrophe. A minor worry becomes a disaster. But when your mind is calm, those same thoughts appear and disappear without overwhelming you. The content of your thoughts matters far less than the state of the mind experiencing them. This is why Buddhist monks spend so much of their training in solitude, stillness, and simplicity. Not because they're avoiding the world, but because they're strengthening the mind's foundation. A strong mind can face anything. A restless mind is defeated by even the smallest challenge. Toxic thoughts aren't powerful on their own. They become powerful when the mind is too scattered to see them clearly. Breaking stimulation habits also exposes something deeper. You begin to feel how addicted you are to distraction. Most people are not addicted to pleasure. They're addicted to escape. Escape from boredom. Escape from self-awareness. Escape from the reality of their inner world. But Buddhism teaches that escape is an illusion. Anything you run from, you strengthen. Anything you sit with, you weaken. So the real work is simple and uncompromising. Create space. Reduce unnecessary noise. Stop filling every gap with stimulation. Let the mind rest. Let the agitation settle. You don't have to force clarity. You just have to stop feeding the chaos. The moment you reduce external noise, internal clarity begins to rise on its own. The less stimulation you consume, the more grounded your mind becomes. And once your mind learns to settle, toxic thoughts no longer dominate you. They appear, but they don't take over. They arise, but they don't define your reality. They pass through, but they don't stay. Because a mind that is no longer restless is a mind that cannot be controlled by its own thoughts. 4. Train attention through mindfulness. In Buddhism, mindfulness isn't some soft practice for relaxation. It's not breathing slowly to calm down, and it's not about feeling peaceful. Mindfulness is a discipline, a forge, a training ground where the attention, the most precious resource you have, is sharpened with relentless repetition. If your attention is weak, the mind becomes a playground for toxic thoughts. If your attention is strong, thoughts lose the power to drag you into suffering. This is one of the core truths Buddhism teaches. Suffering is not created by thoughts but by your lack of control over the attention that chases them. The untrained mind jumps wildly from one thought to the next, reacting automatically to every inner movement. A memory appears. The attention dives into it. A fear appears. The attention spirals around it. A desire arises. The attention merges with it. You're not choosing any of this, it's happening to you, because your attention has never been trained to stay in one place. It has become soft, scattered, and easily hijacked. Mindfulness is the antidote. Not because it makes thoughts disappear, they won't, but because it puts you back in control of where your attention rests. Buddhism doesn't care about controlling thoughts. It teaches you to control the mind that perceives them. The whole purpose of mindfulness is to develop the skill of noticing and then choosing without being overpowered by whatever appears in the mind. Imagine standing at the edge of a busy road. Cars, your thoughts, are constantly passing by. Some are slow, some are fast, some are loud, some are messy. Most people run into the road without thinking and get hit again and again by thoughts they never needed to engage with. Mindfulness trains you to stand on the side and simply observe the movement. You see the thoughts, you hear them, you notice their speed, their force, their patterns, but you stop stepping into traffic, you stop getting hit. When you start practicing mindfulness, you immediately realize how out of control the mind is. You sit still for 1 minute trying to focus on your breath, and within seconds, the mind drags you into a memory, a fantasy, a worry, a conversation, or some completely meaningless thought. This isn't failure, it's exposure. You're finally seeing the mind as it operates without distractions covering it up. Most people don't realize how chaotic their mind actually is because they never give it a chance to show itself. Mindfulness reveals the real condition of your attention. Buddhism teaches that every time you notice your attention drifting and then gently bring it back to the breath, to the body, to the present moment, you're training the mind in the exact same way you train a muscle at the gym. You're building strength. You're developing control, and most importantly, you're weakening the automatic habits that make toxic thoughts feel overwhelming. This is where people misunderstand mindfulness. They think the goal is to stay focused perfectly. That's not the point. The point is the returning, the noticing, the waking up from the distraction. Every single time you bring your attention back from wandering, you're strengthening awareness. That single movement, the return, is the training. The messy mind is not the enemy. The drifting is not the enemy. The only problem is never returning, never noticing, never choosing. Over time, this repeated training changes the way your brain functions. The mind starts developing stability. Thoughts arise, but they don't automatically pull your attention with them. You begin to experience a new kind of inner space, a space where thoughts can appear without controlling you. This stability is called sati in Buddhism, and it's one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. It's not some gentle state of calm. It's sharp, alert, present awareness that sees clearly without collapsing into every thought that arises. When mindfulness deepens, something powerful happens. You begin to perceive toxic thoughts as powerless movements rather than personal truths. A thought that once triggered anxiety now feels like a brief flicker. You observe a thought that once pushed you into self-doubt now appears like a whisper in another room. The distance grows, the grip loosens. You stop drowning in your thoughts because you are no longer inside them. You're watching them from above. Mindfulness also teaches you the difference between attention and awareness. Attention is narrow and focused. Awareness is expansive and spacious. Toxic thoughts feel overwhelming when your attention collapses into them and forgets everything else. But when you sit in awareness, a thought becomes tiny, a small ripple in a vast ocean. The problem is never that the thought is too big. The problem is that your awareness has become too small. Mindfulness reverses this. It expands your field of consciousness, so thoughts no longer dominate the entire inner landscape. Buddhist teachers often say the untrained mind is like a candle flame in strong wind, constantly flickering, unstable, vulnerable. One gust of emotion and the flame bends, one surge of fear and it shakes violently. But mindfulness turns that flickering flame into a steady one. You become unshaken by the mind's storms. Thoughts continue, but you are unmoved. The Buddha compared this to a mountain, immovable even when clouds gather, Winds rise or storms roll through. The storms are the thoughts, the mountain is the trained mind. This is why mindfulness is not passive. It's not sitting around waiting to feel peaceful. It's active mental training. You're refining your ability to stay rooted in the present moment with full awareness, and that skill becomes your shield against toxic thinking. When a painful thought arises, mindfulness lets you witness it without being hijacked. Instead of spiraling into reaction, you observe. Instead of drowning in emotion, you feel it and let it pass. Instead of believing every thought, you see thoughts as passing events in the mind. And because you no longer identify with them, their power evaporates. You cannot stop toxic thoughts from appearing, but with mindfulness you stop them from controlling your life. A mind trained in attention doesn't panic when negativity arises. It doesn't fuse with self-doubt. It doesn't collapse under stress. It sees clearly, responds intentionally, and remains steady. This is the true purpose of mindfulness, not to silence the mind, but to master how you engage with it. When the attention is strong, the mind stops being your enemy. It becomes something you guide, not something that drags you around. This is the heart of Buddhist practice. The moment you shift from being a prisoner of your thoughts to becoming the observer of them, that shift is the foundation of mental freedom. 5. Stop identifying with the mind. If you want to understand why toxic thoughts dominate your life, you have to confront one of the most challenging, uncomfortable truths in all of Buddhism. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. And you are not the mental stories you've been rehearsing for years. The mind generates experiences, but those experiences are not you. This is the essence of anatta, the principle of non-self. Not as a philosophical theory, but as a practical tool for freedom. Most people spend their entire life assuming the voice in their head is the voice of their identity. If a thought says I'm a failure, they accept it as a description of themselves. If a memory resurfaces, they relive it as if it defines them. If fear appears, they say I am afraid. Not fear is arising. That unconscious fusion, the merging of awareness with mental content, is the root of suffering. The Buddha didn't say thoughts cause suffering. He said identification does. Think of the mind like a theater projector. It throws images, stories, memories, fantasies, and fears onto the screen of your awareness. But you mistake the projections for reality. You forget you are the watcher, not the movie. You forget you are the screen, not the image. And once you forget that, the mind's illusions become your identity. This is how toxic thoughts hook you. They present themselves as who you are. And because you've never been taught to disidentify, you believe them instantly, not because they are true, but because the ego attaches itself to anything familiar. Even paying a thought like I'm worthless doesn't hurt you because of the words. It hurts you because you think it's describing you. A thought like I can't do this only has power because you accept it as a limitation of your character instead of a passing mental event. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins the moment you personalize experience. When anger arises, you say, I am angry. When insecurity arises, you say, I am insecure. But the Buddha instructed something radically different. Drop the I, drop the identity, simply acknowledge what's happening as a temporary phenomenon. No self, only anger arising. No self, only fear passing through. No self, only thought appearing. This shift sounds small, but it completely changes your relationship with your mind. Here's the brutal truth. The mind doesn't care about you. It produces thoughts based on habit, memory, conditioning, biology, and past experiences. It's like a machine generating patterns, but you've spent your whole life mistaking the machine's output for the voice of your soul. When the mind spits out a negative thought, you feel attacked personally, but the thought was never personal. It was just mechanical, impersonal, empty. Toxic thoughts become powerful only when you turn them into part of your identity. Buddhism warns that the ego searches constantly for something to cling to. A role, a belief, a wound, a fear. It even clings to pain because pain is familiar and predictable. People hold on to negative identities. I'm the anxious one. I'm the one who always messes up. I'm the one nobody respects. Not because they're true, but because the ego is terrified of not having a fixed identity at all. Even a painful identity feels safer than no identity, and this clinging traps people in cycles of toxic thinking. When you stop identifying with thoughts, you break the cycle instantly. It's like a chain snapping. You finally separate self from mind. You stop using thoughts to define your worth, your capabilities, your story. You begin to experience the mind as something that produces activity, not something that defines existence. And for the first time, you see that the thoughts were never talking about you. They were talking to themselves. The practice of non-identification is not passive. It's fierce awareness. It requires catching yourself the exact moment you begin to merge with a thought. Notice the shift. You feel fear, and instantly the mind says, I'm afraid. You feel doubt, and the mind says, I'm not capable. You feel sadness, and the mind says, I am broken. Mindfulness gives you the space to interrupt that process. Instead of collapsing into the thought, you observe fear is present. It is not mine. Doubt is arising. It is not self. A memory is appearing. It has no owner. This is not denial. You're not pretending negative thoughts don't happen. You're recognizing that the thinker behind those thoughts is an illusion. When the Buddha taught that there is no fixed self behind your experiences, he wasn't trying to be mystical. He was pointing at something people overlook. Your thoughts change every moment. Your emotions shift constantly. Your personality evolves over time. So how can any of these be you? If something changes, it cannot be your essence. If something comes and goes, it cannot be who you are. Toxic thoughts arise and disappear, but awareness, the observer, remains constant. This observer, this awareness is the part of you that cannot be harmed by thoughts. It's the sky untouched by storms. When you live from awareness instead of identification, toxic thoughts become like distant echoes, noticeable but meaningless. They lose the emotional weight they once carried, because you no longer treat them as personal messages. You stop taking your thinking so seriously. You stop reacting to every mental movement. You stop believing everything the mind tells you. You begin to see the mind as a tool, not a ruler. And once you stop identifying with the content of your mind, your relationship with yourself transforms. You start feeling lighter, freer, clearer. Thoughts still appear, but they pass quickly because nothing inside you clings to them anymore. The mind loses its authority. Toxic thoughts lose their teeth. Suffering weakens because the root of suffering, identification, is dissolving. This is the heart of Buddhist liberation. Freedom doesn't come from changing your thoughts. Freedom comes from realizing you are not the one thinking them. 6. Replace reaction with investigation. If there's one thing the Buddha understood better than anyone, it's this: the untrained mind reacts before it understands. Reaction is automatic, unconscious, and conditioned. A thought appears, and the mind obeys it. An emotion arises, and the body tightens. A memory surfaces, and the heart sinks. You don't choose any of this, it happens to you, because the mind has been running on instinct your entire life. Buddhism teaches that this automatic reactivity is the root mechanism of suffering. Not the thought itself, not the emotion itself, the reaction to it. A fear arises, the mind reacts with panic. A doubt arises, the mind reacts with avoidance. A desire arises, the mind reacts with grasping. A painful memory appears, the mind reacts with aversion. This chain happens so fast that most people never see the gap between stimulus and reaction. They live in a loop. Thought, reaction, suffering. Thought, reaction, suffering. Buddhism's solution is not to suppress the reaction or fight it. That only strengthens the pattern. The solution is to interrupt the chain at the moment it begins. And you do that not by resisting the reaction, but by investigating the experience. Investigation, known in Buddhism as Dhammavicca, is an active, curious, clear awareness that examines the mind instead of blindly responding to it. Investigation doesn't ask, how do I stop this? It asks, what is this? This single shift changes everything. Reaction is blind, investigation is conscious. Reaction is emotional, investigation is neutral. Reaction strengthens the thought, investigation dissolves it. When a toxic thought appears, the untrained mind collapses into it instantly. It floods the body with emotion. It triggers old memories. It reactivates fears. And it drags you into the story as if it were happening in real time. But when you bring investigation into that moment, the experience loses its automatic quality. Suddenly, you're watching the thought instead of obeying it. You're noticing the tension in the chest instead of drowning in it. You're seeing the emotion rise instead of identifying with it. Investigation doesn't require analyzing the story behind the thought. That's just another trap of the mind. Investigation is simpler and far more precise. It asks questions from awareness. not intellect. What does this thought feel like in the body? Where is the discomfort located? How long does this emotion actually last when I don't feed it? What triggered this reaction? What's the energy of this thought? Tight, fast, heavy, sharp? What happens if I don't respond to it? These questions don't require verbal answers. The act of looking is the transformation. When you investigate a thought instead of reacting to it, you discover something profound. The thought has no substance. It's not a solid object. It's not a threat. It's not a command. It's a sensation, a flicker, an event in consciousness. And the moment you observe it without feeding it, the energy behind it begins to weaken. Buddhism is brutally honest about why we suffer. We react because we don't understand our experience. We suffer because we don't examine it. Investigation breaks that ignorance. You begin to see patterns you never saw before. You see how fear triggers certain bodily tensions. You see how insecurity has a certain tone, a tight, collapsing sensation. You notice how anger rapidly heats the chest but burns out quickly if unprovoked. You see how thoughts seem loud only when you cling to them. Investigation turns your life into a direct laboratory of awareness. You stop assuming and start observing. And here's the part most people overlook. When you investigate something with awareness, you cannot simultaneously be controlled by it. Those two states cannot exist at the same time. Observation pulls you out of the thought. Reaction pulls you into it. Once you start investigating toxic thoughts, they begin to look repetitive, predictable, mechanical. You see that the mind is recycling the same patterns again and again, just dressed in slightly different words. The illusion of new problems collapses. What you thought were fresh crises become recognizable loops of conditioning. This recognition alone destroys half their power. The Buddha compared uninvestigated thoughts to shadows cast in darkness. They look terrifying because you can't see what's really there. But the moment you shine light on them, the light of investigation, the monster shrinks into something ordinary and harmless. This is why investigation is considered a core factor of awakening. It cuts through delusion. Not by force, not by suppression, but by clarity. Everything that is clearly seen loses the power to manipulate you. Everything that is examined loses its authority. Investigation also breaks emotional momentum. When a thought arises and you react, the reaction generates more thoughts which trigger more reactions. But when you investigate, you interrupt the momentum. The chain stops with you. Suddenly, you're not feeding the fire anymore. You're looking at the fire directly. And in doing so, you realize how small it truly is. One of the most powerful insights of Buddhism is this: painful thoughts don't hurt you. Your resistance to them does. When you investigate instead of resist, the emotional grip loosens, the body softens, the mind widens, the fear shrinks, the thought fades. Investigation teaches you something even deeper. Your mind is not out of control. Your awareness has simply been asleep. Once awareness wakes up even slightly, the entire inner landscape changes. Toxic thoughts become transparent instead of overwhelming. You see their beginning, their peak, and their end. You realize they don't last long unless you feed them. You experience directly that thoughts are events, not enemies. Most people spend their lives reacting, never understanding their mind, never exploring, never investigating. But Buddhism trains you to do the opposite, to turn toward your experience instead of running from it. To look directly into the heart of fear instead of avoiding it, to examine the mechanics of the mind with the same curiosity a scientist brings to an experiment. Because when you investigate your thoughts instead of reacting to them, you stop being controlled by your programming. You stop being a victim of your conditioning. You become the observer, steady, awake, aware. And once the observer is active, the mind cannot manipulate you the way it used to. Investigation is freedom. Reaction is imprisonment. Choose the one that liberates you. 7. Build focus by letting go, not pushing harder. Most people have a completely backward idea of what focus is. They think focus is about forcing the mind into submission, tightening the jaw, narrowing the eyes, clenching the muscles, grinding through distraction with aggression. They believe that if they push hard enough, the mind will finally listen. But Buddhism makes it brutally clear. The harder you push the mind, the more it resists. The more you force it, the more it fights back. True focus, the kind that cuts through toxic thoughts, dissolves restlessness, and allows you to see reality clearly. doesn't come from pressure, it comes from letting go. Not letting go in some lazy, passive sense. Letting go as an act of precision. Letting go as a stripping away of everything unnecessary. Letting go as a strategic removal of mental noise, so the natural clarity of the mind can emerge without obstruction. The Buddha compared the mind to a lake. When the wind is strong, the surface is disturbed. Waves crash, ripples scatter, reflections warp. Try looking into the water during a storm, you can't see anything clearly. But when the wind stops, the surface becomes still, the water becomes calm. And without you doing anything, clarity appears. You can see the reflection, you can see the depth, you can see what's below the surface. That calmness, that stability, that sharpness, that is samadhi, the concentrated mind. And it arises not from effort but from quieting the wind, which means letting go of the unnecessary agitation you constantly feed. People mistakenly believe that their lack of focus is a personal flaw. Buddhism sees it differently. It's not that you're incapable of focus. It's that your mind is carrying too much, too many distractions, too many attachments, too many unfinished thoughts, too many desires pulling you in different directions. A mind overloaded cannot focus no matter how hard it tries. You don't fix this by adding more force, you fix it by subtracting the excess. The untrained mind is always grasping, chasing stimulation, clinging to pleasure, running from discomfort, reaching for anything that promises escape. It's like a hand that never stops grabbing things, but a hand that's constantly grabbing can't hold anything with stability. In the same way, the mind that clings to everything cannot stay steady on one object. This is why letting go is the foundation of deep focus. Not because it makes your mind empty, but because it removes the clutter that prevents attention from settling. Letting go means releasing the mental commentary that constantly interrupts your awareness. It means dropping the emotional reactions that spike every time a thought arises. It means loosening your grip on expectations, worries, fantasies, regrets and desires, all the sticky residues that keep the mind restless. When these begin to fall away even slightly, the mind becomes lighter. It stops collapsing under its own weight. Suddenly, staying focused stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like the natural state of a quiet mind. Buddhism emphasizes a critical truth. Focus is not created. It is revealed when the mind stops clinging. Imagine holding a cup of water in your hand. If your hand is shaking, the water will ripple. You can tighten your grip, clench your muscles, strain as much as you want, but the shaking won't stop. In fact, trying harder makes the shaking worse. But if you relax the hand, not to the point of dropping the cup, but just enough to stop forcing, the tremor calms, the water stabilizes, and you can hold the cup with almost no effort. That's how the mind works. Forcing creates instability. Letting go creates steadiness. When you sit with the intention to focus, the first thing you'll notice is how much the mind wants to wander. It rushes toward plans, memories, urges, irritations, fantasies, anything other than the present moment. This isn't a failure. This is the mind showing you what it's holding. Every distraction that arises is an attachment. Every impulse to move, check, think, or react is a habit revealing itself. Letting go in Buddhism means allowing these impulses to appear without following them. You don't suppress them. You don't fight them. You don't chase them. You simply remain still and let them pass. And as each impulse passes without being fed, the mind becomes less restless. The noise inside gradually weakens. The agitation loses fuel, and the space needed for true focus begins to open naturally. This is how Buddhist concentration develops. Not through force, but through non-participation in the mind's constant demands. You begin to understand that focus isn't something you generate, it's something you stop interfering with. The mind is naturally capable of stability. The only reason it feels chaotic is because you keep pulling at it from every direction. Letting go is the process of loosening these internal threads until the mind falls into its rightful place. Samadhi, the deep concentration Buddhism speaks of, is not a mystical trance. It is the mind resting fully on one object, undistracted, undisturbed, unmoved. It is powerful, sharp, luminous awareness. It feels effortless because effort has been replaced with stillness. And that stillness is only possible when you've released the reactive tendencies that normally scatter your attention within seconds. When toxic thoughts arise in a concentrated mind, they pass like a shadow crossing a wall, seen but without impact. When toxic thoughts arise in an agitated mind, they feel like a storm. The difference isn't the thought. The difference is the strength and steadiness of your awareness. Letting go leads to steadiness. Steadiness leads to concentration. Concentration leads to freedom from toxic thinking. This is why Buddhists value simplicity, silence, and non-attachment, not because they are holy, but because they strengthen the mind. When the mind is uncluttered, it naturally sharpens. When the mind is burdened, clarity becomes impossible. Letting go is not something you do once. It's something you practice over and over. Let go of the urge to check your phone. Let go of the impulse to react to every emotion. Let go of the belief that thoughts deserve your attention. Let go of the need to constantly stimulate the mind. Let go of the idea that you must think your way out of suffering. Each moment of letting go is like removing one stone from a pile sitting on your chest. Gradually, the weight lifts. Breathing becomes easier. Awareness becomes spacious. And the mind begins to settle into a quiet stability you didn't even know was possible. This stability becomes your strength. This clarity becomes your protection. This focus becomes your freedom. Because the moment you stop struggling, the mind finally has room to become what it naturally is. Calm, clear, grounded, and unshaken by toxic thoughts. 8. Transform awareness into discipline and consistent practice. You can understand every teaching in Buddhism, read every insight, memorize every principle, and still remain trapped in toxic thinking if you don't turn awareness into discipline. The Buddha was not interested in intellectual understanding. He was interested in practice because he knew the mind doesn't change through knowledge alone. It changes through repetition, training, and the relentless application of awareness in daily life. Most people treat clarity like an accident. They wait for the right mood, the right environment, the right moment. They expect the mind to calm down on its own, as if mental peace is something that falls into your lap. But Buddhism exposes the truth. A chaotic mind is the default. A disciplined mind is the exception. If you want that exception to become your reality, you need consistent practice. Not forceful, not rigid, but deliberate and continuous. Here's the harsh part most people don't want to face. Your current mind is the result of your habits. Your next mind will be the result of your discipline. If your habits are unconscious, reactive, and overstimulated, your mind will be the same. If your habits are mindful, intentional, and rooted in awareness, clarity becomes your baseline. Buddhism teaches that the mind is like a field. If you don't tend to it, weeds grow. Not because the field is broken, but because neglect naturally creates disorder. Toxic thoughts are weeds. They grow when you don't pay attention, when you let stimulation overrun your senses, when you react instead of observing. Discipline is the act of tending the field, pulling weeds, planting seeds, watering the soil. It's not dramatic, it's not glamorous, but it rebuilds the mind from the ground up. Discipline in Buddhism isn't punishment, it's alignment. It's choosing actions that support clarity instead of chaos. Here are the foundations. 1. Discipline of attention. This means repeatedly returning your awareness to the present moment even when it wanders, especially when it wanders. Every moment of return strengthens the mind. Every moment of return is a repetition in the gym of awareness. 2. Discipline of simplicity. The more unnecessary complexity you eliminate, the more stable your mind becomes. Simplicity has nothing to do with poverty. It's about refusing to overload your senses with junk. If you reduce mental noise, the mind naturally becomes focused. 3. Discipline of stillness. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It's the ability to remain unmoved inside even as life continues around you. This comes from intentionally creating pockets of silence throughout your day. Even 5 minutes counts. 4. Discipline of non-reactiveness. When an emotion arises, you don't attack it, follow it, or get swallowed by it. You pause, you look, you investigate. Every time you refrain from reacting, you weaken the old neural pathways that kept you trapped. 5. Discipline of letting go. Letting go is not philosophical. It's practical. It means releasing the urge to control everything, releasing the constant narrative building, releasing the compulsive drive to mentally fix every feeling. The more you let go, the less toxic thoughts can grip you. Now here's what most people miss. Discipline always begins before the mind is ready. If you wait for motivation, you'll wait forever. If you wait for the mind to feel calm, it never will. If you wait for the right day, you'll lose another decade. Discipline is the decision to train the mind when it's inconvenient, because that's when transformation actually happens. Every monk who ever walked the Buddhist path started with a restless, undisciplined mind, the same kind you have now. The difference is they practiced anyway, and through practice something extraordinary happens. The mind becomes predictable, not in a robotic way, but in a stable, grounded way. Your awareness becomes steady, your emotions become manageable. Thoughts that once seemed overwhelming now pass through like harmless smoke. Focus becomes easier, not because you're trying harder, but because you've removed everything that blocked it. Buddhism teaches that discipline transforms the mind in stages. Stage 1. Awareness of chaos. You finally see how wild the mind actually is. It's uncomfortable but necessary. Stage 2. Consistent returning. You start catching yourself drifting and gently bringing the mind back. This builds strength. Stage 3. Softening of reactivity. You stop reacting instantly. You begin observing more and defending yourself less. Stage 4. Reduction of mental clutter. Thoughts become fewer, emotions become lighter, noise loses intensity. Stage 5. Rising stability. Your mind stops scattering so easily. Focus lasts longer. Clarity becomes familiar. Stage 6. Natural concentration. You aren't forcing focus anymore. It appears because the mind is trained to rest. Stage 7. Unshakable presence. This is the point where toxic thoughts no longer control you. They arise like flickers in a vast space, noticed but powerless. This is the result of discipline. Not talent, not luck, not knowing the right techniques, but practice. Daily, steady, honest practice. Buddhism makes one promise: if you train the mind will obey. If you neglect the mind will rule you. You have already experienced what happens when the mind rules you. Toxic thoughts, anxiety loops, compulsive overthinking, distraction, lack of focus. Now it's time to experience the alternative. A mind that listens to awareness rather than dragging you through old patterns. Discipline is the bridge between understanding and transformation. Without it, lessons remain ideas. With it, lessons become your lived reality. And when discipline merges with mindfulness, the mind becomes something extraordinary. Clear, sharp, steady, and immune to the toxic patterns that once dominated it. Focus becomes natural. Clarity becomes constant. Awareness becomes your baseline. And you finally experience the freedom Buddhism has been pointing to all along. The mind will keep producing thoughts long after this video ends. The question is no longer whether they appear. The question is whether you continue bowing to them. Buddhism doesn't promise a quiet mind. It promises a trained one. A mind that doesn't panic when fear arises, doesn't collapse when doubt shows up, doesn't crumble under old stories you've seen. Now that your thinking isn't the enemy, your unconscious obedience to it is. Every moment from here is a choice. Follow the old patterns or watch them. React blindly or investigate. Cling tightly or let go just enough for clarity to surface. If you practice even a fraction of what you learned here, genuinely practice it, not just understand it, your relationship with your mind will start to flip. The storms will still come, but you'll no longer be the one being thrown around. You'll be the one standing still, watching the clouds move across a sky that was never broken. Your mind isn't a prison. It only felt like one because you never held the key. Now you do.